There are names that don't knock when they enter your mind. They slide in quietly, like a shadow stretching across a room when the light changes. And once they are there, they refuse to leave. This is one of those names. A name that still echoes in police files, court transcripts, and the memories of families who never got to see their children grow up. And before we go any further, before the story tightens its grip, before the past begins to breathe again, take a moment, because once this begins, it doesn't let go easily. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the true story on our channel, Crime Chronicles US, where America's unsolved mysteries, vanished criminals, and chilling cases come alive. Every story is real, every detail matters, and the truth remains buried in the shadows. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to stay updated with every mystery. Clifford Olson did not look like a monster. That is always the first thing people say, because it matters more than we want to admit. He looked ordinary, forgettable, like a man you'd pass in a grocery store aisle without a second glance. That ordinariness was his camouflage. It allowed him to move through neighborhoods, through playgrounds and streets and conversations, without setting off alarms. Evil does not always announce itself with a warning sign. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. Born in Canada, Olson grew up in a world that didn't seem designed to create a headline. His early years were marked by instability, discipline issues, and a pattern of manipulation that would later become his signature. He learned early how to lie without flinching, how to shift blame, how to test boundaries, and then step right over them. Teachers noticed, authorities noticed, but noticing is not the same as stopping, and the system he moved through was full of gaps wide enough for someone like him to slip through again and again. By the time Olson reached adulthood, crime was already woven into his identity. He wasn't driven by desperation or hunger. He was driven by control. Theft, fraud, sexual offenses, repeated arrests. Each encounter with law enforcement should have been a wall. Instead, they became doorways, short sentences, early releases, warnings instead of walls. Every time he walked free, something inside him learned a dangerous lesson. He could get away with it. And then, children started disappearing. Not all at once, not in a way that immediately screamed for attention. One child gone could be a runaway. 2 could be coincidence. 3 could still be explained away if you didn't look too closely. Olson understood this better than anyone. He understood how communities rationalize fear, how parents tell themselves comforting stories, how authorities hesitate before saying the word serial. He thrived in that hesitation. The victims were young, vulnerable, trusting in the way only children can be. Olson approached them with familiarity, with false authority, with promises that sounded safe enough to believe for just a moment. That moment was all he needed. The details of what he did are not what define this story. What defines it is the silence that followed. Bedrooms that stayed frozen in time, toys left untouched, parents who slept next to telephones that never rang. As weeks turned into months, the fear spread quietly, like a fog rolling through British Columbia. Parents walked their children closer. Curfews tightened. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Police departments worked cases that seemed disconnected on the surface, but shared something darker underneath. Still, Olson remained free, moving through the same spaces as the families he was destroying, blending in, watching, waiting. What makes this story especially disturbing is not just the crimes, But how Olsen interacted with the system meant to stop him. He wasn't just violent, he was calculating. When police finally closed in, Olsen didn't collapse under pressure. He leaned into it. He realized that he still had something they wanted: information. The locations of the bodies. Answers for grieving families. Closure that could never truly come, but was desperately needed. And so he began to negotiate. In one of the most controversial decisions in Canadian criminal history, authorities agreed to pay Olsen for information about his victims. For each body he led them to, money was placed in a trust for his wife and child. It was a decision made in desperation, under the weight of unbearable public pressure. Families wanted their children found. Communities wanted certainty. Investigators wanted the nightmare to end. Olsen enjoyed this phase of the investigation more than he should have. He taunted officers. He played games. He withheld information just long enough to remind everyone that he was still in control. Each trip to a burial site was not an act of remorse. It was a performance. A reminder that even in handcuffs, he could still pull the strings. 11 children. That is the number history remembers. 11 lives, reduced to a statistic that never feels big enough to hold the loss it represents. Each child had a name, a voice, a future that was erased. And yet, Olsen seemed more interested in how his story would be told than in what he had done. He gave interviews. He smirked. He leaned into his notoriety, feeding on attention the way others need oxygen. When the trial came, there was no dramatic mystery left about his guilt. The evidence was overwhelming. His own words sealed his fate. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 25 years. A sentence meant to ensure that he would never again walk free. The courtroom was heavy with grief, anger, and a kind of exhausted relief. He was off the streets, but nothing felt like justice. Prison did not humble Olsen. It became another stage. He continued to manipulate, to provoke, to insert himself into conversations and media whenever possible. Other inmates despised him. Guards kept a close watch. His name carried weight inside those walls, and not the kind that commands respect. Eventually, the violence he had unleashed into the world came back to him. He was attacked in prison, beaten severely, left with permanent injuries. Even then, he survived. Years passed. Public memory faded in the way it always does, slowly, unevenly. New crimes filled headlines. New names replaced old ones. But for the families, time did not soften anything. Birthdays still came and went. Empty chairs remained empty. The absence was permanent. Olsen aged behind bars, his body deteriorating, his mind still sharp enough to know exactly what he had done, and exactly how much pain it had caused. He never expressed true remorse, not the kind that centers victims instead of self. His death in prison years later closed a chapter on paper, but it did not end the story. Stories like this don't end cleanly. They linger in policy debates, in policing reforms, in the quiet rules parents teach their children without ever explaining why. And this is where the story tightens again, because the question is not just who Clifford Olsen was or what he did. The question is how many chances he was given, how many warnings were missed, and how a system designed to protect failed again and again until the cost was unbearable. As the echoes of his actions continue to ripple outward, as lessons are argued over and remembered too late, What remains is not his name, but the silence he left behind. A silence that still waits to be understood. And now the story moves into the part that people often rush past. The part that feels quieter but weighs more. Because this is where the damage settles in and refuses to fade. After the sentencing, after the cameras stopped flashing and the courtrooms emptied, life did not return to normal for anyone connected to the case. There was no reset button. The world kept moving forward, but it did so unevenly. For the families, time became something fragile, something that cracked under pressure. Every year that Olsen remained alive felt like an insult layered on top of grief. Knowing that he woke up each morning, breathed, aged, complained, and existed was a reminder that justice is not the same thing as healing. Inside prison, Olsen continued to behave exactly as he always had. He complained constantly. He filed grievances. He wrote letters. He attempted to insert himself into public conversations whenever the opportunity appeared. He fed off attention, even negative attention, because it confirmed that he still mattered. That need never left him. Even stripped of freedom, even surrounded by concrete and steel, he searched for ways to feel important. Other inmates did not see him as notorious in the way the public sometimes does. They saw him as something lower. Child killers occupy a specific place in prison hierarchy, and it is not a safe one. Olsen was isolated for his own protection. Moved frequently, watched closely. When he was eventually attacked, beaten so severely that he suffered permanent brain damage, many saw it as inevitable. Violence was the language he had spoken his entire life. It finally answered him back. From that point forward, Olsen was diminished physically, but the harm he had caused remained fully intact. Brain damage did not erase responsibility. It did not soften the memories. It did not restore the futures he had stolen. He became older, weaker, less visible, but never forgotten by those who mattered most. His existence became quieter, but the echo of his crimes continued to reverberate. Meanwhile, outside prison walls, the case reshaped how institutions operated. Laws were questioned. Sentencing practices were reevaluated. The idea that a repeat sexual offender could be released again and again became unacceptable in the public mind. Olsen's crimes forced conversations that should have happened sooner. They became a grim reference point in discussions about dangerous offenders, parole decisions, and victim protection. But reform born from tragedy is a bitter thing. It always arrives late, trailing names that should never have become symbols. Each policy change carried the unspoken truth that it was written in the absence of 11 children who should have been alive to see it. The controversial payments made to Olsen during the investigation never stopped haunting the system. To some, they represented a necessary evil, a trade made under impossible circumstances to give families answers. To others, they were an unforgivable betrayal, proof that the justice system had allowed a killer to profit from his own cruelty. The debate never fully resolved because there was no resolution that could satisfy everyone. Every argument circled back to the same painful truth. Nothing about this case had clean edges. As years passed, Olsen's name surfaced less frequently in mainstream conversation, but it never disappeared entirely. True crime books referenced him. Documentaries revisited the case. Students studied it in criminology courses. each retelling carried a risk. The risk of centering the perpetrator instead of the victims. And that risk is always present, because stories like this walk a thin line between understanding and exploitation. What mattered most, what still matters, are the children. Their names, their faces, their interrupted lives. They were not footnotes to a monster's biography. They were the story. They were sons and daughters, siblings, classmates. Kids with routines and dreams and ordinary days that should have continued. Remembering them means refusing to reduce them to numbers or symbols. Olsen eventually died in prison, not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly, from natural causes complicated by his injuries. His death did not bring celebration. It brought something closer to release, a loosening of a grip that had held for decades. For some families, it marked the first time they could breathe without knowing he was still out there somewhere, alive. For others, it changed nothing. Grief does not obey timelines. Death did not grant him redemption. It did not erase his choices. It simply ended his ability to cause further harm. The world did not become better because he died. It simply became slightly less burdened by his presence. And this is where the story finally settles. Not with him, but with what remains after someone like him is gone. What remains are lessons learned at an unbearable cost. What remains are systems forever marked by failure and reform. What remains are families who carried on not because they were strong, but because stopping was not an option. Clifford Olsen wanted to be remembered. He wanted his name to linger. He wanted power even in infamy. But memory is selective, and history does not belong to those who crave attention. It belongs to those who endure. Over time, his name fades, while the impact of what happened continues to shape how society protects the vulnerable and recognizes warning signs it once ignored. In the end, his story is not about fascination or fear. It is about consequences. It is about what happens when manipulation meets institutional weakness. It is about how silence can be deadly and how listening too late can cost lives. It is a reminder that evil does not always arrive loudly, and that prevention often lives in the unglamorous work of paying attention, enforcing boundaries, and believing patterns before they escalate. And as this chapter closes, the final truth remains steady and unchanging. He does not get the last word. The last word belongs to the lives he could not erase, to the families who refused to be defined by him, and to a world that learned, too late, but still learned, that ignoring the quiet warning signs can have devastating consequences. That is where this story ends. Not in darkness, but in remembrance. Not in his shadow, but in the light of the lives that mattered far more than his ever did. So friends, if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Crime Chronicles US for more chilling unsolved mysteries from across America. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next story.